Hello and welcome to UX Transitions, where I talk with guests who've made a career change into UX. I'm Robert Crane. My guest today is a native of Maui. He was trained as a chef, worked for a number of years in the hospitality industry in Las Vegas and San Francisco, came back to Maui to work as an electrician for the family business, and is now an accomplished product designer who is also coaching design talent. All the way from Maui, welcome Kevin Paz.
Thanks for having me, Robert.
Let's start the podcast with an obvious question. What in your words is UX and why does it matter?
For me, UX is user experience, is creating experiences, quotation marks, right, that are friendly and easy to use. And I'd say experience in quotation marks mainly because it's not only related to a screen, but even to physical things in the world, but even your interactions with other people. The reason why I think UX is important, and I don't want to be cliche or anything, but we always hear about empathizing with our users, empathizing with the other person, but it's important that we do connect with them. And so we can create these experiences for them that makes them feel seen and heard. As a designer, how we do this, it's up to us how we go about doing it. But at the end of the day, it's important to be sure that the people that we're designing these experiences for feel like they're being humanized and being seen, being heard.
What you just said reminds me of a colleague who once told me, UX always comes first, everything else comes second. Would you agree with that?
UX does come first. I can align with that. As you mentioned earlier, how I'm mentoring and coaching designers now, we are currently working on a project that we're focusing on the UX. And my mentees, my interns, brought up the question on branding, and I've give them that advice. Hey, let's wait on the branding a little bit. Let's focus on making sure that the UX is great for the user, making sure that it's easy to use and friendly to use, and then we can layer in branding afterward. Also, taking into consideration when you start working about branding, okay, if we're designing an app or a software-based system, how do we incorporate the branding for that? But if we start thinking about branding for the app, the SaaS software, then what else do we need to think about that needs to be rebranded as well? They have a landing page, they have all this marketing material. We have to rebrand that at the same time. And so my suggestion was to let's hold off on branding, mainly because there's going to be a lot that needs to be taken into consideration. And if we really want to do a good job on branding, we're going to have to give it the respect and time it deserves to make sure that all touch points are taken into consideration.
I would like to talk about your background. You are a native of Maui and of mixed heritage. Can you tell us about it and how it shaped you?
Yeah, being from Maui, being from Hawaii, what happened for me growing up was it taught me to be hospitable and open and really caring and understanding about other people. And I think that's helped me in my career and how I've been able to navigate design because my upbringing of being hospitable, being caring, being empathetic helped me really understand what users are looking for when it comes to a product. Helped me understand what my clients or my stakeholders are looking for when they're having their asks. And so even though it's a welcome, a friendly place to grow up in, I was able to utilize that approach to really understand people, what gets them tick, what gets their wheels turning, what makes them feel better, just getting a better understanding of people as a whole, their wants, their desires, and how do I create designs for that?
You have worked in the hospitality industry for a number of years. Where does your interest in the hospitality industry come from? And what have you learned during that time that you still use today?
My interest in hospitality came from osmosis. Hawaii is very heavily in tourism, very heavy in food and beverage restaurants. And so with that being one of the primary economic drivers for the state, it was very easy for me to go into it. I did not, as I'm Filipino heritage, I did not want to get into nursing. Blood makes me queasy, so I'd do the next best thing, right? That's where my interest came in. And the follow-up question that what I've learned throughout this time was really learning how to work with other people, how to collaborate towards a common goal. Yes, I worked in hotels, even though it's not necessarily design related, but what I did get from that was as a department head, as someone who was in charge of different avenues of a hotel, I needed to learn how to talk with the other departments to ensure that whatever problem our guests or even the physical venue that I was working was or whatever problems we were running into with any part of the hotel, I'd have to talk with other departments to get the job done. And having to learn how to talk to different departments because they have different language, they have different personalities, they have different terminologies was very important. And then also having to learn how to collaborate with them when we didn't align on certain things. How do we go ahead and solve for that problem? Also, what really helped out and something that I do today was identifying the right problem to solve for. I'd have guests. I've worked in food and beverage where my guests were pretty intoxicated a lot of the times when I was in Vegas. They're mumbling, and so they're trying to convey an issue that they're having and having to understand what are they really complaining about? What is the pain point that they're trying to convey? They're saying one thing, but is there something on a deeper level that they just can't say, or they don't know, they don't have the words to say it and they're not aware of it? And so that's something that's been with me ever since hospitality, and even back up growing up here in Hawaii. I had a great high school teacher that taught me what is a problem and what is the problem that we're trying to solve for. And so, yeah, great tools and great lessons in that industry that I was able to bring over to design.
It almost sounds like transitioning to UX was actually a very small step. How did you discover that UX was a valid career option?
So this was at the time where I was kind of getting burnt out in hotel industry. It was maybe 11, between the hours of 11 p.m. and 2 a.m., where I started really reconsidering what I wanted to do with the rest of my life. I'm working some weird hours, making a great career out of restaurants and food and beverage. I had a clear career path, but I knew that there was something else that I could be doing that wouldn't burn me out so much. And at that time, I was already considering moving to Seattle from Las Vegas, and I was on a job search and just cruising around LinkedIn or Indeed at the time of jobs in Seattle. I came across a job posting that said user experience, clicked into it, and as I was reading through the job description, a lot of the things that was mentioned in that job description resonated with me because I felt like I was already doing it, but in a different medium. Instead of doing it in person, I could do it on a screen. And that really made me hopeful that there is something else that I could do that allows me to carry over the skills that I currently have. And so after discovering that job posting for the first time, having a few conversations with people who were in the industry already and reading the book, The Design of Everyday Things by Don Norman, that's when I knew that, hey, this is something that's very possible for me. Let's go ahead and do it. It was scary taking a bet on yourself into a completely new endeavor. Might sound kind of morbid, but at the end of my life, I didn't want to have that regret of not pursuing something that caught my interest, that I found exciting, that would just help me open up much more doors and opportunities. And so I figured, why not? And COVID was happening around this time. And so alignment and timing just felt right.
There are many ways to get educated in UX. Why did you choose to follow a UX bootcamp?
Some sort of structure was something I knew that I needed. Going towards a boot camp and even also considering university at that time as well. But I knew that I needed something, or just a course to help me identify the gaps that I might be missing. And hence why I wanted to go towards a boot camp. The reason why I didn't want to go into a university, even though that would have been a great option as well, was that I did not want to take a loan that large. It's a very expensive thing. And also knowing that I'm taking a risk in something that I'm going into a new endeavor that I don't know how it's going to turn out. And I don't want to be so invested and so much in debt for something that might not work out. A boot camp felt more reasonable. And so I decided to go with the boot camp instead.
How did you manage your time with a UX bootcamp and your daily activities?
When I first started my design education, I my original plans was to work full time while doing the boot camp. However, noticing that was a lot of effort needed for the boot camp itself, I couldn't juggle multiple priorities at the same time. Granted, this was COVID. I'm back at home with the family, so my living expenses were very minimal. And that's when I decided to let's not work and let's spend my full time taking a look at or going through the course, the UX Bootcamp. When it came to my daily activities, I kind of treated it like an everyday job where I would segment a certain amount of my time throughout the entire day that I'll be doing coursework. I'd be working on my project, doing research, reading, or just anything related to the UX Bootcamp between a certain amount of hours or a certain amount of time. Typically, when I did it was I would get started around 8 a.m. my time and then sign off around 2 p.m., 3 p.m. in the afternoon. And that was my day. Everything else that I would like to do would be done outside of that 8 to 3 o'clock time block so that I created the time and space needed to do the coursework, but also create the time and space needed to do everything else in my personal life.
As you mentioned before, there are many overlaps between the hospitality industry and UX when it comes to understanding your user or customer. But design is also a crucial aspect of UX. Was it difficult for you to master this aspect, to master design?
I want to say it was a little difficult for me. Theory sometime, just remembering color theory, going over that kind of threw me off for a little bit, and just a little bit with visual design. What really helped me was just to remain curious and always wanting to learn more and understand more. What helped me overcome any of the challenges I had with design and art itself. Questioning my thoughts, questioning even my design work, and getting feedback from other design boot campers at that time to see what was going on. I've been told that I've had a keen eye for design and I've paid attention to details, but I think that comes from when I trained as a chef. It's always attention to details. It's always how do you make something presentable and good looking and also tasting well at the same time with this medium of food. And because of that training, it's helped me remember those concepts of art and design just in a different medium and bring it over to the screen instead of food.
Another important aspect of UX is the research part. And I see many aspiring UX designers struggling with research for a number of reasons. How did you manage to master this during your UX bootcamp?
Whenever I hear that, and I have that with my mentees right now, every time they mention research, it's always coming back to user interviews. I find that interesting why user research automatically, for a lot of people that I've come across, correlates to user interviews. And I could see why it gets challenging there. For me, myself, I think the reason why I was able to navigate the user research part, especially user interviews, was because of my experience in hotels and hospitality. When I was working on the Las Vegas Strip, we were hiring, I think we were trying to increase our staff by 20. This included bartenders, barbacks, and cocktail servers. And so I'm a young kid at the time, early 20s, interviewing people who are well over my age, old enough to be my parents or even my grandparents in some cases, and having to have a conversation with them and learn a little bit about their background and why they'd be a good fit. And so being comfortable with talking to people and understanding them and where they're coming from was really helpful. The only challenge that I ran into or the learning curve that I ran into was the type of questioning and the type of framework that I needed to get used to when I'm talking to candidates or whenever I'm conducting a user interview, even usability tests. It's just understanding what are we trying to find out. Learn a little bit more or ask a follow-up question to dive a little bit deeper and just be curious about what the participant is saying and just try to dig deeper as much as possible. Put on your detective hat and just try to be detectives when you're talking to people or whenever you're doing any kind of other research. I think I also thought about this question a little bit a couple of days ago Me training to be a sommelier also helped out, mainly because when we were doing blind tasting for wines, we'd have to really pay attention to the wine that we're drinking and be detectives of what's in the glass and what's on our palate to understand this is what's really happening in the glass, in the palate, and just running through all those details to identify what was really in the glass.
The way you talk about how your experience in the hospitality industry has helped you navigate the UX industry, it almost makes it feel like having a background in hospitality sets you up for success in UX.
Working in the service industry and being intentional when you go into the service industry, what you want to take out of it in terms of collaboration, problem finding, and just understanding people as a whole and problems as a whole, and just get all of that. Or how do you, it's great to go into the service industry so you can learn these skills in a low risk environment before you go into working in tech. And that's the thing. It's a low risk environment. When it's a low risk environment, it's easier to learn. It's easier to make mistakes. Everyone's scared to make mistakes. So if you could make these mistakes in a low risk environment, you're going to be more likely and more comfortable to fail.
I guess it doesn't have to be necessarily in the hospitality industry. If you are in an environment where you can fail and learn from your past experiences, you can apply those lessons in UX as well. But let's go back to the UX Bootcamp again. Was creating a portfolio a challenge for you?
Yes, for two reasons. The platform, I ended up creating my portfolio, Webflow. And the reason why I decided to go with Webflow itself was because of the amount of flexibility you have when it came to creating your website. Wanted to learn that early on, just because when you're working full time, when your capacity is overwhelming, how can you go about learning something complicated or challenging in that time as well? When I completed bootcamp, I had the time. So I figured, why not? The other big challenge, and I still run into this challenge today. I was just wrapping up another case study not too long ago, but identifying what is the story that I'm trying to tell and keeping that at the forefront as I'm creating my portfolio, as I'm creating my case studies. What is the story that I'm trying to tell? What do I want the people who are reading this or I'm presenting this to? What do I want them to learn from this case study? It might mean two different things to different people, and there goes that feedback of tailor your presentations to the job that you're applying for. But yeah, it's just what is the story that you're trying to tell? Think about that all the time.
And what is, in your opinion, the biggest misconception about UX bootcamps?
You're job ready when you're completing with the boot camp. I'm sorry, you're not. What I've seen lately were early career folks who decided didn't want to go into the industry that they got their degree in, and so they'd go boot camp and do UX design, and hopefully thinking that they could get a job right after that. I don't think you're ready just because a lot of the collaboration skills is very important. These skills need to already be built out before you go in. The other thing that I think a lot of bootcamp grads need to learn is defending your design decisions. How do you push back on a stakeholder when you don't align with what they're proposing? How do you manage those situations? These are difficult situations and conversations to have. If you don't know how to have them going into your first role, then you're going to have a hard time. And so that's why I say go work in the service industry, learn these kinds of skills in a low risk environment so that when you do go out there and look for your first design role, you already feel more comfortable with the collaboration aspect of it all.
And what is, in your opinion, the biggest misconception about being a product designer?
We make things look pretty on a screen. I ran into this situation several times already. And as a product designer, we actually try to identify the problem that needs to be solved for and create solutions for those problems. We're more than just pixel pushers. As product designers, we're more than just creating screens for our users that are easy to use, but we're also advocates for the business and the business needs and the business goals. Our jobs as product designers How do we effectively balance those two needs on the screen? But the business has a big goal that we need to meet. If we don't hit that goal, then we affect our bottom line and our profitability for the company. And if we always advocate for the user and not take into consideration the business need, the business loses revenue, the business loses the profit. What happens at that point? Unfortunately, layoffs.
I totally agree with what you just said. It's the mature way of looking at your role as a product designer. On that note, when you look back from where you first started to where you are now, where do you see the most growth in your development as a product designer?
The most growth that I've seen, and I say this only because of my heritage, coming from Hawaii, being someone who's friendly and hospitable, that likes to please people, to now someone who not necessarily push back all the time, but to getting further clarification, to understand why my stakeholders are saying or proposing these things. Instead of telling them a direct no, I've gotten the skills and the capabilities to get them to open up and let them tell me why they think a certain way. And maybe I can go ahead and start to influence or persuade them in another direction without it seem like I disagree with what they say right away.
You have been working as a product designer for a couple of years now, and I was wondering if you have experienced imposter syndrome, and if so, how do you handle it?
For me, I like to try to build up evidence that I could do what I'm doing. For example, when I started product design and design itself, yeah, I try to give myself affirmations. I'm a product designer. I'm a product designer. I'm a product designer. But that can only go so far. I picked up some smaller projects, some side projects to help build up that reputation that yes, I am doing actual design work here. Another way to that was trusting in my capabilities as a professional. When dealing with imposter syndrome, the other thing that I like doing is detaching myself from any expectations. I've noticed that whenever I've experienced imposter syndrome, it's because I was attached to an expected outcome. I was attached to something that I wanted to happen. The moment I let go of that, the imposter syndrome started to go away. However, the fear is still there. And at that point, navigating that fear has always been just to lean into it. And it's okay to experience this fear. It's what you do with it is what's important. The more you experience fear and the more that you lean into that fear and act courageously, the more easier it is going to be for you to go through that whenever it comes up.
Interesting. It's interesting because from what you just said, one might think that imposter syndrome and fear are the same, and yet they are two different types of emotions. With imposter syndrome, you detach yourself from it, whereas with fear, you tend to lean into it.
I had an interview earlier this morning. This is my first interview in a long time, and so it's been a while. The fear did come up, but as I've coached myself to remind myself that it's okay to be fearful, feel this fear, move into it, and move forward with it, with what you're needed to do. In my case, this interview, a couple of minutes into the call, the fear had already subsided, and I was able to get through that conversation without any issues.
I want to go back to Maui. Is there a difference in how people see a product designer from Maui compared to one from the mainland?
Yes, I do think there is a difference. People from Hawaii, people from Maui, we are very hospitable, we're very open, we're very caring. We have that aloha spirit. And with that comes the easy and the likelihood of us being somewhat yes men, always saying yes to what people are asking of us. And so knowing that and knowing how some people from the mainland could be more direct and say no or push back in a sense, there is a challenge or there is a difference from designers from Hawaii and designers from the mainland. We definitely have to learn how to overcome this obstacle of always being a yes man sometimes and be able to push back when we need to, defend our design decisions when we need to. also knowing that how do we do it in a way that doesn't take away from our friendliness, our caringness, our aloha spirit. Because people from Hawaii are very proud. They tend to be very proud of that type of, that culture background. We're the state of aloha. And so how do we say no in a way that doesn't offend people is something that we have to overcome. And the difference between designers from Hawaii and the designers from the mainland.
I did a bit of research on the tech scene in Maui and the Hawaiian Islands, and I was actually surprised to find that there is a tech scene on the islands. Can you tell us more about it?
So the tech scene on Maui is very small. Everyone is very scattered. When I first got into design on Maui, I was the only designer that I knew of here. However, there's maybe six or seven of us at this moment. There's probably even more. But the challenge with Maui is that everyone's so spread out and there is no central tech central that allows us to connect. And this is for Maui specifically. Oahu and Hawaii as a whole, there is a thriving tech scene, and there is a tech scene that's starting to flourish here. But I feel it's easier for those in tech to be on Oahu just because there's a lot more people there. You're more likely to run into people there that are in the tech scene. There's events that's surrounded in tech. That's where a lot of the startups are coming from. However, I know there's a few companies here in Maui that's involved in tech and they had product design roles open. But I also know there's a few roles in the Big Island or Hawaii Island that have product design roles and that are in the tech scene as well. So it's just a little bit scattered throughout the entire state, but very centralized in Oahu itself.
Let's talk about your coaching. Are your mentees worried about the current state of the UX industry? For example, are they concerned about AI, the lack of junior roles, or the increasing number of new UX graduates entering the market?
Luckily, I haven't been faced with this question from my mentees. However, my advice to anyone getting into UX and wanting to become UX professional and having all these things to be concerned about is having a community is what I think would be very helpful. Because even when I got into the job market for the first time, I had a community, a small group of us UX bootcampers that got together that helped supported one another getting through all these tough times going through the job market. And so just having that close group of people that you could rely on that are doing the same thing, who are pursuing the same goal would be very helpful at this time, just because they're going to come with their perspectives, they're going to come with their learnings, and they're going to share it with the group. What can you learn from these other folks? What can they learn from you? How can they be your support system at the same time? I had a friend that just came to me with an issue they were running with their project and their team. And it's just having that camaraderie with another UX professional that, hey, it's okay, you're going through this. It happens from time to time. What can we learn from that? What can we take away from this? And how can we apply this in the future? I feel, and this is the advice that I feel would be very helpful in the future for the industry.
And do mentees from the island face different challenges compared to those from the mainland?
The challenge that anyone who ever wants to work remotely from Hawaii is, and I'm running into this myself, was even though a company says they're fully remote, a lot of the times they're not accepting applicants to all 50 states for tax reasons. They're not able to operate in certain states just because they haven't had the taxes set up for that particular state. I've been running into that issue quite a bit. Another issue is that there are some great companies that are based out of New York or the eastern part of the United States. Collaboration is difficult sometimes just because I have to wake up at 4 in the morning so I can meet with somebody who's in Charlotte or New York, and it's the beginning of their day and they're busy for the rest of the day. It happens. And so the time difference challenge could be very difficult as well. Yeah, other than that, oh, and the other one is that I feel a lot of companies don't think there is design talent or tech talent in Hawaii. They don't associate tech with Hawaii. They think beaches, pineapples, palm trees, right? But there is this growing tech community. And so, how do we voice that we're here? There is talent here. And the unfortunate thing is that, like I mentioned briefly earlier, how I was the only designer here, and now there's five or six of us on the island. Three of them, it's not even from Maui, not even from Hawaii. They're from the mainland. They relocated here. So there is talent here. There is a thriving tech scene that's booming here. And so how do we get more attention to that?
What would you advise a person who wants to transition to UX?
It's really learning how to collaborate with other people in a way that you're not just being a yes man. Learn to collaborate in a way where you could both, whoever's in the discussion, can have opposing ideas, but yet come to an alignment in some sort. That's something that I feel is very important to learn. The difficult thing is that because we've become so connected with our devices, I feel like we've become disconnected with individuals and how to interact with them as a whole. And so, how do we relearn to connect with people in a way that we could get work done and be aligned, even though we don't agree with everything all the time? How do you go about learning that? Find a way to learn that as you're doing your transition into design. Because at the end of the day, yes, even though we're working on a screen, we're also working with a lot of people at the same time.
That's a great way to end this podcast. Kevin Paz, thank you for your time today. And to our listeners, if you enjoyed this podcast or have any feedback, please leave a message. I wish you all the best in your journey and thank you for listening.